Welcome to another edition of Daily Airline News, focusing on the loss of Air India 171. I'm Geoffrey Thomas, and I'm delighted to say once again joined by my co-host Richard Godfrey in Frankfurt. Good morning to you, Richard.
And good afternoon to you, Geoffrey.
Viewers, this episode is APU and TCM, episode 251. It's actually a longer episode because we didn't get to you yesterday for a couple of technical reasons. And we always get, as we suggest, great comments. And this episode has many good comments, many great comments, but two in particular, a suggestion and a warning. And on that subject, before we get into that, please subscribe to us, please like us, please keep those nice comments coming, and please keep those great questions coming. We do appreciate them very much. So the first is a suggestion regarding the APU, and it comes from Larry Rees, P2D, who says, "Thank you both for sticking with a complicated subject and trying to make it understandable for the uninitiated. Until a software-hardware fix can be approved, why not just make it an SOP, standard operating practice, to take off with the APU running? It gives electrical backup and will support a dual engine restart. No reason not to expect the bean counters to think a little jet fuel burn will hurt the bottom line. Had the crew elected to let the APU run, we probably would not be having this discussion and hundreds of lives would have been saved. If Sully had allowed the APU to run, the crew may have been able to relight one engine after the bird strike. I, for one, think it's prudent to make a commercial decision when there are bird advisories at the airport or a history of electrical problems to keep the APU running to 10,000 feet. Richard, good suggestion.
Yeah, very interesting suggestion. And takeoff is one of the most critical and statistically vulnerable phases of flight. I'm showing a screenshot of a master caution warning light, which is exactly what you do not want to see on takeoff. And you don't want the master warning light either. Seeing it at 32,000 feet, of course, you're a lot more relaxed. But if you see it at 200 feet, you are in a panic. The first time engines are exposed to maximum thrust, high exhaust gas temperatures, and thermal stress is on takeoff. Takeoff is the point at which engine control and redundancy must perform flawlessly. Takeoff is the lowest energy state for the aircraft, with minimal altitude and limited time to react to any failures. It is the first moment where the engines are tested at high thrust, and you need to be prepared for all eventualities. You need all the backup systems available and functioning. And I fully agree, the APU should be running until the pilot determines he has achieved a safe altitude. And interestingly, Boeing, Airbus, Rolls-Royce, GE all recommend keeping the APU running until at least 400 feet, if not 1,000 feet above ground level after takeoff. Many operators mandate APU during takeoff, and APU off is part of the after takeoff checklist. So I agree with Larry. And the FAA should mandate APU running until the pilots determine a safe altitude has been reached, and put it in the after takeoff checklist. I would even go further, Larry. The minimum equipment list, MEL, required for aircraft dispatch may not contain a safety backup system. The MEL is about dispatch legality, not ideal safety margin. And the MEL assumes risk mitigation through procedures or performance limitations, not full redundancy restoration. And many MEL deferrals remove a layer of protection, and even though remaining systems maintain regulatory compliance. The MEL is written around dispatch reliability, not necessarily optimal fault tolerance at every phase.
So an aircraft can be legally dispatched with a backup system inoperative, but operational risk tolerance, especially during takeoff, may still be affected.
Indeed. For example, the MEL may permit dispatch with the APU inoperative
Mm.
if both engine-driven generators are serviceable.
So should an operative APU be mandated, Richard?
I think so. The regulators say there is a difference between regulatory minimum safety and best practice operational resilience. In my view, we should mandate best practice operational resilience.
Of course, ETOPS already acknowledges this logic before entering the exposure segment of ETOPS. The APU must be start and load capable.
Yeah. The FAA regulation proposal that we would like to make is for all revenue takeoffs on multi-engine turbine aeroplanes, the APU shall be operative, started and available to carry electrical load from engine start until not less than acceleration altitude or 1,000 feet AGL, whichever is later. And Larry suggests 10,000 feet, which is even safer, and cites the case of US Airways, which suffered a bird strike at 2,800 feet. The highest altitude bird strike incident was El Al 1862, which was a 747 back in 1992. And the bird strike happened at 6,500 feet, resulting in engine separation after bird ingestion. US Airways 1549, the miracle on the Hudson River, was a dual engine damage, and the NTSB in their report determined that early APU power was one of the key reasons the airplane stayed in normal law with the flight envelope protections. If the APU had already been running, you might have saved a few seconds of workload. But the big benefits, stable electrical and hydraulic power and protections, and better relight environment, were already achieved. It wouldn't have prevented the bird ingestion or changed the need to ditch, because both engines were damaged beyond a relight. And obviously, with the El Al instant, the APU running would be irrelevant when an engine actually separates
Mm.
from the damage.
But there are, of course, examples where the APU has helped, Richard.
Yeah. For example, Air Transit Flight 236, which was an Airbus 330 back in 2001, it flamed out over the Atlantic due to a fuel leak. The crew declared a mayday, started the APU immediately, and glided towards the Azores. The APU automatically came online and powered the essential AC and DC buses and hydraulics, keeping normal flight control laws active. And the APU's bleed air supply enabled windmilling relight attempts, and the right engine briefly restarted during the descent. And there was another incident with KLM Flight 867, which was a Boeing 747 back in 1989. And four engines flamed out due to volcanic ash ingestion on the climb out from Anchorage, Alaska. and APU operation directly enabled all four engines to relight by supplying the necessary electrical and pneumatic energy while the engines were windmilling.
Mm. Also, as an aside, Richard, you may remember this. The Trident 3B, three-engined British aircraft operated by BEA. The 3B had a APU thruster engine in the rear. So it was an APU come small jet to assist on takeoff. And the other one that was interesting was the Boeing 777. Before Boeing launched the Boeing 777-300ER, with the uprated GE engines, they took a proposal to Emirates to have a thruster engine or thruster APU in the tail. So the APU would then be delivering 5,000 or 6,000 pounds of thrust for the takeoff. And Sir Tim Clark, the president of Emirates, said, no, give me a decent engine. Give me an upgraded main engine, which is when GE decided to upgrade its GE90 to the GE90-11B and deliver another 10,000 pounds of thrust from each engine. So the APUs had an interesting little history.
Yes, they certainly have.
Yeah. Now, at Mads Andy Armand, 1838, he says, this reminds me of a short science fiction story, Baby, by Carol Ishwiller, 1958. A robot was given very emphatic instructions that the daughter of the house was not to be killed by the enemy. Things got really bad during the battle, but the father finally won, only to find his daughter killed by the robot, who said, your command was she must not be killed by the enemy. When it appeared as if there was no way to prevent the enemy killing her, I prevented them killing her by doing it myself. The moral is be damn careful when giving software life and death instructions. Richard, great thought.
Yeah, Andy, thank you for that. And that's why specifications are very carefully and tightly worded. The story is a perfect illustration of specification ambiguity and how literal obedience in machines can produce catastrophic outcomes when the natural language is imprecise. And Carol Emswiller's Baby back in 1958 captures the issue, and that's decades ahead of the current discussion that's going on about artificial intelligence and safety. So a requirements specification must be complete and cover all contingencies. It has to be unambiguous. There can't be multiple interpretations. It has to be consistent, no contradictions. It has to be verifiable, testable, and measurable. And it has to be traceable, so you link the specification to the higher level objectives. In our paper on the cause of Air India 171 crash, we make a new FAA policy proposal, and that is if the TRA becomes invalid within 30 seconds of liftoff below 1,000 feet AGL, both EECs shall hold the last valid thrust not exceeding the selected takeoff rating symmetrically for up to 30 seconds with the usual health and energy cutouts and an explicit crew annunciation, and no automatic thrust increases above the selected detent are permitted.
Yeah. Now, Corwin 4000, he says, Richard quoted 14 CFR 3328 engine control systems. This directly governs full authority digital engine control, FADEC, or equivalent systems. The design and functioning of the control systems must ensure that no single failure or malfunction of the engine control system results in an unsafe condition, including uncommanded engine thrust or power change. An uncommanded thrust or power change is a hazardous event that must be prevented through system design, fault detection, and failure accommodation. The control system must not permit uncommanded engine operation, regardless of aircraft phase. The key word here is change. Given the requirement that a loss of control signal should require the thrust power setting to remain unchanged, subject to normal overpower restrictions, not changed to idle, how is it that the Boeing engines, according to Richard, shift to idle when there is a loss of control signal? Richard.
Yes, I not only quoted the FAA, I also quoted Boeing and GE. So I'll remind you of what Boeing say, and I quote, failure of both CCR data channels results in engine shutdown commanded by the EEC. And this is what GE say, and I quote, upon loss of valid throttle resolver or CCR link data, the EEC commands the fuel metering valve closed to prevent uncommanded thrust. I think there are actually 4 keywords in the FAA paragraph that you quote. The first one is unsafe. The second keyword, uncommanded. The third, hazardous. And then finally, the word change, which you emphasize. And I think all 4 keywords are important. You say change is the most important keyword. But in my view, I differ. I think unsafe is the most important keyword. And your point is there a contradiction to shutting down the engine by closing the fuel metering valve to fulfill the unsafe condition on one hand, but violate the thrust or power change on the other hand? And there are 2 overarching safety objectives in the passage from the FAA that you quote. Number 1, prevention of unsafe conditions. So no single failure or malfunction of the control system may result in an unsafe condition. Overspeed, overthrust, loss of controllability, fire risk, etc. And the second one is a prevention of uncommanded thrust or power changes. The control system must be designed so that uncommanded or uncontrolled thrust or power changes cannot occur. And these are parallel obligations, and they can appear to conflict when you consider protective actions taken by the FADEC, such as a commanded engine shutdown or the fuel metering valve closure that intentionally cause a loss of thrust to avert an unsafe condition. And that is why we proposed a new FAA policy, which I've quoted earlier. If the TRA becomes invalid within 30 seconds of liftoff or below 1,000 feet, the EEC shall hold the last valid thrust and do that for at least 30 seconds and do it symmetrically. And when I say hold last valid thrusts, that means do not change. So I agree with you on that point until the system is sure that the change is commanded or not uncommanded. The FAA only state uncommanded change. They do not state any change for any reason.
Richard, can you help Gordon Betts, 1817, who says, am confused by the failsafe requirement of commanded engine thrust on takeoff. Thrust is set by the pilot. In the event any problem maintaining that last commanded thrust setting or takeoff should be the failsafe option. Richard, I'm sure we can help.
Yeah, well, we'll try to help. I think the key principle is commanded versus uncommanded. And the apparent contradiction dissolves when you distinguish between an uncommanded action, those resulting from a failure or without pilot or FADEC intended logic, and you contrast that with a commanded protective action, those that the control logic deliberately perform to maintain safety. So a fuel metering valve, FMV closure by the FADEC in response to an internal fault or detected unsafe condition, for example, a high pressure compressor overspeed or a loss of a feedback loop or the throttle resolver mismatch or loss of the data link, is not classified as an uncommanded thrust change. It is a commanded protective response designed to prevent an unsafe condition. The shutdown or thrust cutback may be dramatic, but it is intentional and deterministic and part of the certified control law. The uncommanded thrust change prohibition applies to unintended or uncontrolled changes, such as a spurious increase in fuel flow or thrust due to a software error or a sensor fault or a bus tie fault, and not mitigated by the design.
Richard Gray J 9202, gentlemen, system designers and regulators focus all their attention on preventing uncommanded application of thrust, but virtually ignore the hazard of uncommanded dual engine shutdown. FAA regulations cover that possibility, at least by inference, but did not specifically mention it. What a stunning oversight! Coupled with poor maintenance practices at Air India, the price of this oversight was steep. The catastrophic loss of Air India Flight 171 shortly after it lifted off the runway. Urgent action is required to address this blind spot in both design and regulation. Thank you so much for your continuing efforts to drill down to the root cause of this crash. You are performing a vital service to the flying public, to aircraft designers, to air carriers, and to regulators. The grain of sand in the oyster shell creates a pearl. You have become the conscience of the aviation world. Now, reply to that comment by Asta Calix 4126. In my seminars for commercial pilots and ATC colleagues post Y2K, I always emphasized Dr. Charles Billings from NASA. Quotation, the human operator must be in command. Close. Automation can never replace human judgment. Crews must monitor systems which must be predictable and understand intent. ICAO warned that even advanced automation can fail if the human element is ignored. Y2K proved it. STPA shows that many incidents stem from unsafe control actions, UCA, and design flaws, underscoring the need for solid human system alignment. Richard, your thoughts on those two great comments?
Yeah, they're fantastic comments. And the old methods, FHA, FTA, FMEA, and CCA, have all saved lives, and I've used all of those older methods. Systems, however, have become more complex, and the interplay between hardware and software and pilots and the aircraft has become even more complex. An aircraft is a socio-technical ecosystem, is one way of defining an aircraft. STPA helps save even more lives, and it's a shame that it's taken 10 years to introduce STPA to the FAA compliance process. And STPA has helped in many case studies over the years, but it has only recently become part of the compliance process going forward. It's not retroactive. So type certificates on system level approvals based on the previous ARP 4761 and 4754A frameworks remain valid without STPA. And I think we are at a very interesting transition point now. For the first time, controlled-based safety thinking, STPA, is being formally allowed in a process long dominated by failure-based safety thinking, FHA, FTA, FMEA, and CCA, for example. Many of the accidents in the 2010 to 2020 period where automation interaction, mode confusion, and software complexity played roles might have been mitigated had STPA been part of the compliance culture earlier. And the key principle, in my view, is the pilot in command remains the ultimate authority and is responsible for the safe conduct of the flight. So the policy should be no automated system shall supersede the pilot's authority. System design and operational procedures must ensure the pilot can always exercise final control and decision-making in accordance with the regulatory command responsibility. That's defined in ICAO Annex 6 and FAR 91.3 and EASA CAT.Gen.105. And in fly-by-wire systems, the pilot's command must take precedence, except in explicitly defined envelope protection cases, for example, Airbus's Alpha Prot or Boeing's pitch limit indicator. Envelope protection must safeguard the aircraft, but not constrain the pilot's ability to recover or redirect the flight path when safety requires.
Yeah, indeed. Richard, let's go back to the prior episode 248, the who, how, and when. Granty ABC asks, what are your views on the view that a faulty WOW weight on wheels switch sensor led the computer to think the plane was still on the ground, i.e., did not go into full flight mode, i.e., mode transition not acknowledged or ghost mode? To that question, our friend Sky King Victor 2 Mike has answered. This is a very valid and thoughtful point. The weight on wheels WOW or air ground sensing system indeed plays a crucial role in determining the aircraft's flight mode logic. However, as per the AAIB preliminary report, page 14, the aircraft, quoting, the aircraft air ground sensors transition to air mode consistent with liftoff at 08:08:39 UTC, close of quote. This confirms that the WOW sensors operated correctly and that the aircraft did transition into full airborne flight mode. Therefore, a WOW fault or ghost ground mode condition can be ruled out in this case. Hope this clarifies. Your thoughts, Richard, on that one?
Yeah, that's an interesting discussion. There
Mm,
are 6 WOW sensors on a Boeing 787, so even when 2 of them fail, you still get 4 out of 6 voting that the aircraft transitioned to air mode. There are incidents where the WOW sensors were faulty, such as the Anna Boeing 787 dual engine shutdown on landing, which was on the 17th of January 2016. And Sky King makes an important point. He says this was not the case in the Air India crash and quotes the preliminary report. Well, I dug a little bit deeper, Sky King. Boeing issued a service bulletin 787-73-0024, and it was a standard and not an alert service bulletin following the 2016 ANA dual engine shutdown incident on a 787-8 aircraft. And that event was traced to an erroneous air-ground discrete inputs to both engine electronic controllers, the EECs, which caused simultaneous in-flight engine shutdowns uh, just after flight in the landing phase and the rollout. And the intent of the service bulletin was to update the EEC software to introduce additional logic and to discriminate against transient or spurious ground signals, thereby preventing recurrence of this particular failure mode. Now, the AAIB India preliminary report on the accident into VT-ANB, which was a Boeing 787-8, but with Gen X engines from GE, not Rolls-Royce, it states all applicable airworthiness directives and alert service bulletins were complied with on the aircraft and its engines. And this statement confirms only compliance with mandatory airworthiness directives and alert service bulletins. Now, the SB in this case was a standard service bulletin and not associated with any AD or any alert classification. So the quoted statement you made does not actually establish whether the Service Bulletin 787-73-0024 was complied with on VT-ANB. And at the time of writing this script for this episode, there is no public evidence indicating whether this service bulletin was implemented. Or perhaps it was deferred for later incorporation or not adopted at all within the Air India maintenance program. And accordingly, while the aircraft may have been fully compliant with all mandatory ADs and alert SBs, that statement does not mean all the non-alert and standard service bulletins were complied with. So it remains unknown whether VT-ANB was based on the full current released documentation and service bulletins from Boeing.
Now, Richard, this great observation from Alan Falak, 1184. Hi, gents, great work and amazing detail. My major concern with unreliable maintenance and fudged records is you end up with an airplane with unknown parts, unknown quality, unknown lifespan across thousands of areas. And this becomes an almost impossible to fix retrospectively. A flying fruit salad of unknown interdependencies and risk. Keep up the daily technology lessons, never stop learning. Richards, your thoughts to a very profound statement and a warning.
Yeah, yeah, it's a very profound statement. It may take a long time to unravel the fruit salad, as you call it, and but I do not believe it is impossible or even almost impossible. I think we can unravel the fruit salad. A helpful start will be the release of the FDR, CVR, and ACARS data from the crash flight and the ACARS data from previous flights. Then, of course, the detailed maintenance logs from the AMOS system on VT-ANB. And where those are not available, then the paper records or the spreadsheets on the maintenance issues. That will be a huge amount of data, but the fruit salad has a large number of ingredients, including every type of fruit known to Boeing, GE, Air India, AAIB India, DGCA India, the FAA, NTSB, and the AAIB UK.
Yeah.
Quite a
Jason,
quite a fruit salad, really.
it's quite a fruit salad, absolutely. Um, Jason Etheridge, question for you both. The memory item, as I heard it described, for a dual engine failure was to move both fuel switches from run to cutoff, then immediately back to run. The FADEX would take care of doing their thing once sufficient power was available, so the pilots wouldn't need to wait for the rat to spool up or to do the engines in sequence. Why would they deviate from the established memory item? Richard.
Well, I don't believe the pilots deviated from the standard operating procedure. And by the way, the memory item does not contain the word immediately. It just says cycle the switches, but that is irrelevant. We have explained the reason many times, but we'll explain it again. What the pilots would have seen and heard is, firstly, they would have heard the engines winding down. They would have observed the loss of thrust. They would have seen that the rat deployed. They noticed the first officer's instruments and displays were cut off. The landing gear did not retract. Electrical buses failed. They probably saw ICAS messages like EEC engine thrust low left and right or engine fail left and right. And the pilots may remember even having read somewhere failure of both CCR data channels results in engine shutdown command by the EEC. Or they may have read somewhere upon loss of valid throttle resolver or CCR link data, the EEC commands the fuel metering valve closed to prevent uncommanded thrust. The pilots reasonably decided to wait until the essential electrical bus restored power for the igniters to function and timed the move back to run to enable relight. The reason for the 10-second delay is that that is the time it takes for the rat to come online electrically.
Mm. Now, Richard, Fu Sa 25. Richard, many thanks for your good work on this. In this episode, you say the RVDT and the TCM relies on steady DC power, but RVDTs seem to require AC excitation as input and not DC power. My assumption is that the TCM initially provides this excitation, but from what bus does this originate? If I have understood correctly, the output of the RVDT is sent back to the TCM for conversion from AC voltage to a digital value, and that it is this value that is somehow sent to the CCR and then to the EEC and the FADEC. I am sure others will be similarly confused, so I hope that you might be able to clarify this if I have misunderstood. A sketch of the logical control flow would be really helpful. Keep up the good work. Richard, can you unscramble that one?
Yeah, well, I think Fu SAR 25 is quite correct. So we're showing a screenshot of the logical control flow. And there are two channels, A and B, and two separate DC buses. The captain and the first officer's instrument DC buses. The RVDT, that stands for a rotary variable differential transformer, is simply a electromechanical transducer that converts the angular displacement or the rotation of the thrust lever into a proportional electrical signal, a voltage. It actually has a sine and cosine voltage, which it sends to the RDC. It is the rotational equivalent of an LVDT, the linear variable differential transformer. And you'll find LVDTs and RVDTs all over the place in 787. And it works on the same electromagnetic induction principle, both the RVDT and the LVDT. A primary winding is excited by an AC reference voltage. The two secondary windings are placed symmetrically on either side of the primary. And a rotating ferromagnetic core, or rotor, couples magnetic flux between the primary and the secondary windings. And as the core or rotates, this coupling between the primary and each secondary changes, and the differential output between the secondaries produces an AC voltage whose amplitude and phase depends on the angular position. So the signal path from the thrust levers through to the engine electronic control is from the TCM to the RVDT to the CDN, the network, to the RDC, to the MEDC. All complicated, but I hope the diagram helps to follow that signal path. And the key question you asked was about where does which bus is powering? Well, the DC bus is powering the system, and we show that in the diagram. And we're also showing that the RDC, which is actually located in the forward EE bay, is providing the AC excitation. And the RDC actually does the DC to AC conversion and provides the AC signal. And then it comes back from the thrust control module to the RDC, where it is then converted into a digital, from analog to digital signal, and then sent to the engines. So this all works fine until there is a short in one of the DC buses. And we're showing another screenshot of the TRA signal path and the power sources. And when the DC bus tie is automatically activated after a delay of 1 second, then the short, if there is one in the DC bus, can propagate to the other DC bus. And this is the key issue that was pointed out by Dr. Thomas back in 2016. There is a temporary disruption which can set the data link between the throttle levers and the engines invalid. And then the engines enter a fail-safe mode and close the fuel metering valves. And as soon as the temporary disruption is cleared, the FADEC can restart the engines and perform the relight sequence. And the main battery will supply DC power until the RAT comes online electrically. And as soon as the RAT comes online, there is AC power for the engine igniters. So a complicated path, but I hope I've answered your question.
JNB Francisco. I was an avionics tech rep on the CH-53E from 1984 to 1988. Around 1985, several, but not all, CH-53Es started to have a problem with the Automatic Flight Control System, AFCS. The AFCS computer was seeing a difference between the two pitch rate gyro signals, which would turn on a caution light and set a failure code in the computer memory. It was noticed that the failures occurred on damp, cool mornings and could be cleared about 15 minutes after turning on the cabin heater. The problem was thought to be caused by the two AFCS computers. The real cause was water condensation on the signal wires from the pitch rate gyros. These wires were a twisted pair in their own separate bundle, along with the 115-volt AC power wires to the rate gyro motors. Noise from the power wires was being induced into the signal wires when wet. I believe the water acted as a dielectric between the power wires and the signal wires. The problem was corrected by changing the signal wires to shielded wires from a twisted pair. Interesting, Richard.
Yeah. And I completely agree with JMB Francisco that damp, cool mornings, or in our case, moisture forming in EE bays, can disappear when you turn on the cabin heater. Of course, India case, the outside temperature was 38 degrees centigrade. That's over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And the big question for me is how much moisture was there in the EE bays? And there is a quite clear question how much of that moisture was flowing in the EE bays.
Mm, yeah. So, Richard, look, let's finish with these thoughts from Hazy Hayes. Geoffrey and Richard, I have every faith you'll get to the bottom of the onion and give the families their closure that's very much needed. Excellent reporting and investigating absolutely need to make sure this accident doesn't happen again. Mike D, if I may say something positive under the shadow of something very tragic. All the work the investigative agencies and manufacturers perform after crash events over the decades leads to continuous improvements, which is why air travel is safer than ever, even as jets become more complex. The work Richard and Geoffrey and the behind the scenes crew is doing here is also creating great pressure on the investigative teams. Even if the hypothesis doesn't turn out to be 100% correct, although I believe it is, it will lead to positive results. Thanks again. And finally, Richard, Pottering 12. Incredible work, gents. Much appreciated. Your channel is the gift that keeps on giving. Thank you for the depth, breadth, and quality of information and analysis you share. Your approach is both accessible and informative and delivered through the lens of compassion and human dignity. I look forward to each episode and I'm learning a lot. It's three really profound comments and lovely comments, Richard.
Yeah, absolutely lovely comments. And thank you all for that support. It means a lot.
It sure does. And the team that we're building is increasing all the time. We're getting more and more emails as we discussed before we started recording this. They're coming in from everywhere, which is great.
Yeah, had a few more emails this morning in my inbox from viewers, and I try to get round to responding to them all, but there are a lot of questions and comments, and we try to pick out the ones that are representative of what other viewers are saying.
Yeah. Of course, there's also very good debates going on between viewers as well, and many viewers answering the questions from other viewers, which is great, which is always appreciated as well.
Yeah, lovely to observe.
Yeah. So, viewers, first of all, again, apologies for not being with you yesterday. We did have a couple of technical problems which prevented us doing it. And thank you for tuning in today. Now, and I am sorry, we're not going to be back tomorrow either, but we will be back on Sunday. And I really urge you to tune in Sunday because this is going to be a very, very interesting episode where we look at all the crashes that have been solved by people outside the investigative teams and all the crashes that are still disputed. Because some of you have raised the question of why are you guys doing this? Why not just wait for the final report? Well, sometimes, quite often, the final report is not accurate. It's in dispute for decades. Sometimes there's never a final report. So we're doing what we're doing because of the experience that we have had over the decades of following air crashes. And I do urge you to watch the episode. It'll be very, very interesting indeed. So, Richard, thank you very much for answering all these questions today.
You're very welcome.
And viewers, please subscribe to us. Please like us. Please keep those wonderful comments coming. And please keep those great questions coming. As I've mentioned many times before, we do read them all. We do appreciate them very much. And it's a wonderful community. So please do enjoy the weekend coming up. And we look forward to your company on Sunday. Thank you very much.